The White House has been home of some of the most powerful people on Earth, as well as a bunch of rugrats running around and getting in trouble. These are the presidential children, grandchildren, and other babies who were born in the White House. The first child believed to have been born in the White House was enslaved and considered the property of the current president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. After Jefferson was elected, he brought along with him 14-year-old enslaved girl Ursula Granger. He intended to have her study under the White House's French chef so that his Monticello plantation would have someone trained in cooking fancy food. However, this didn't quite work out, as Granger gave birth to a boy named Asnet sometime before March 22, 1802. The father was Wormley Hughes, who remained back at Monticello. The two became married at some point and went on to have another 12 children together. However, Asnet was not well. Jefferson was away from Washington when his steward wrote him a letter on August 17, 1802 that contained the sad news that Asnet had died on the 14th. Ursula returned to Monticello shortly afterward. Often claimed to be the first child born in the White House, James Madison Randolph was actually the first white child born there. His mother was Martha Jefferson Randolph, eldest daughter of Thomas Jefferson and his late wife Martha. The younger Martha was pregnant when she and her husband and their children moved into the White House in 1805 to provide company and perform hostess duties for the widowed president. James was born on January 17, 1806. He was named in honor of Jefferson's fellow founding father and future president James Madison. He would go on to attend the University of Virginia, which had been founded by his grandfather, before deciding to become a farmer. However, he lost that farm within a few years. He was living with his parents when he suddenly became ill and died on January 23, 1834 at the age of 28. Thomas Jefferson brought more than one enslaved girl from Monticello to train under the resident French chef, including 15-year-old Edith Hern Fossett, who also went by Edie.
So for 7 years she'd be trained and eventually come back here and return to Monticello.
Edie was pregnant when she arrived in Washington in 1802. The father, Joe Fossett, was also enslaved, and the couple endured a forced separation for most of the next 6 years. In January 1803, Jefferson recorded a payment to the doctor who attended when Edie gave birth. In July 1806, the child became ill, most likely with whooping cough. News of the illness seemed to have reached his father in Monticello, at which point he ran away from the plantation to be with his wife and child in Washington, but he was eventually caught. He wasn't punished, possibly because Jefferson felt sympathetic when the child died. While they rarely saw each other, Edie and Joe managed to have 2 other children while she was in Washington. They were named James and Maria. Both lived to adulthood after being born at the White House. Edie and Joe had more children once she returned to Monticello. 8 survived, including Peter Fossett. After Jefferson's death, only Joe was freed, while Edie and their children were sold. Eventually, Joe managed to buy freedom for Edie and 5 of their children. In 1806, enslaved 18-year-old Frances Gillette Hern, known as Fanny, was brought to Washington by Thomas Jefferson to assist his sister-in-law, Edie Fossett, in the kitchens. Fanny's husband, David Hern, stayed at Monticello, which evidently put a strain on their marriage. However, they did see each other twice a year when he brought carts of supplies to the White House, and it's believed that she had 2 children in the servants' quarters of the building. Almost nothing is known about these children, though, beyond correspondences indicating that at least one of them died at a young age. On November 7, 1808, Jefferson wrote to Edmund Bacon, the overseer of Monticello, asking him to inform David that his child had died of whooping cough 3 days earlier. In 1828, John Quincy Adams was president, and his son John Adams II was recently married. His wife Mary Catherine Helen ended up getting pregnant almost immediately. John Quincy's wife Louisa Adams was worried because Mary refused to get any exercise and complained endlessly. But the younger couple lived in Washington with the president and first lady until Mary gave birth to a daughter named Mary Louisa Adams in the White House on December 2, 1828.
Oh, see the baby. Again with the baby.
Alas, Mary Louisa's mother didn't seem particularly interested in her daughter, though she was doted upon by her grandparents. Louisa took on much of the mothering role in the girl's life, even comforting her through the night when she was teething. And John Quincy bought her everything from toys to Bibles to a silver cup for her christening that's now in the Smithsonian collection. The Smithsonian is also home to a portrait commissioned when Mary Louisa was about 7 years old. John Quincy also regularly tutored his granddaughter in math and languages. In 1853, Mary Louisa married a man named William Johnson, and they had 2 children before she died on July 16, 1859 at the age of 30. Mary Emily Donelson was a grandniece of President Andrew Jackson through his marriage to his wife, Rachel. Recently widowed when he entered the White House in 1829, Jackson brought his nephew Andrew Jackson Donelson with him to act as his private secretary. His wife Emily and their young son, who was also named after the president, moved into the White House with them. Shortly after settling in, Emily discovered that she was pregnant with her second child. Born on August 31, 1829, Mary Emily Donelson would claim for the rest of her life that she was the first baby ever born at the White House. She had shown that she wasn't concerned with accurate details of her birth from an early age. According to the book Emily Donelson of Tennessee, she changed her own name to Mary Emily from Mary Rachel, which is what she'd been christened as. Mary Emily eventually became involved in Washington politics, and she talked regularly with various presidents and was appointed to positions in the Postal Service and the Treasury. In 1900, she published a book about Christmas at the White House, including a story about convincing President Jackson to hang his first ever stocking one Christmas Eve. John Samuel Donelson was born in the White House on May 18, 1832. He was both a grandnephew and godson of President Andrew Jackson, and he was also the second child of the Donelson family that was born there. He was also to go on to become the only one of his siblings present when President Jackson died in 1845 and the only one to attend his funeral. John Samuel was lucky to survive his first year, as Washington, D.C. was suffering from a major cholera epidemic at the time. President Jackson actually reportedly wrote that John Samuel became ill around his first birthday, although this was only due to teething issues. In 1854, John Samuel graduated from Yale University. When the Civil War began, he joined the Confederacy and served with the Tennessee Regiment. In September 1863, they fought at Chickamauga. The Confederates won the battle, but it ended up being the second deadliest clash of the war, with John Samuel among its casualties. Born on April 11, 1835, Rachel Jackson Donelson was the last of Emily Donelson's 4 children, and the third of those to be born in the White House. In addition to being a grandniece of Andrew Jackson, she was also goddaughter of future President James Polk. While Rachel was a robust baby, her mother's health was quickly deteriorating. After being unwell for many months, Emily Donelson died on December 19, 1836. She was 29, and her youngest child was not even 2 years old yet. Later in life, Rachel moved to Texas, where she married, became widowed, and then married again. She lived quietly despite her association with the late president and had no children. Like her mother, she also ended up being sick for a long time. Her condition eventually became so serious that she decided to risk having an incredibly dangerous operation. She died soon afterwards on March 22, 1888, at the age of 52. Martin Van Buren was president when former First Lady Dolly Madison played matchmaker for his son by introducing Abraham Van Buren to Angelica Singleton. She was a beautiful heiress from a prominent family, the perfect match for the eldest son of the president. They married in 1838, and after a honeymoon in Europe, they moved into the White House. Abraham served as his father's private secretary, while Angelica acted as hostess for the widowed president.
Her thorough elite education would have prepared her quite well for making intelligent conversation.
By 1839, Angelica was pregnant, and then on March 4, 1840, Rebecca Van Buren was born. Tragically, though, both Angelica and Rebecca fell sick shortly afterwards. Angelica was able to recover, but little Rebecca didn't make it. There's a bit of historical disagreement about the details, as some sources record that she was 6 months old when she died, while the National First Ladies Library says she was only 5 days old. Despite this painful loss, Angelica became pregnant again almost immediately. Singleton Van Buren was born in June 1841, 3 months after his grandfather left the White House. When the Southern states officially decided to become the Confederacy in Alabama in 1861, a journalist recorded the scene by writing, "All Montgomery had flocked to Capitol Hill in holiday attire. Bells rang and cannon boomed, and the throng stood bareheaded as the fair Virginian threw that flag to the breeze." The fair Virginian at the center of this display of treason was Letitia Tyler, granddaughter of former President John Tyler. She'd been born in the White House 19 years earlier. Her father was Robert Tyler, a good friend of Edgar Allan Poe, and her mother was a former actress named Elizabeth Priscilla Cooper. John Tyler's wife, Letitia Christian Tyler, was an invalid, so when Robert moved with his father to the White House to work as his private secretary, Priscilla took on the role of First Lady. It was during this time, on April 13, 1842, that the younger Letitia was born. She lived to be 82, dying on July 22, 1924. She's buried alongside her youngest brother in Montgomery, Alabama, the same place where she raised the first Confederate flag. A grandson of John Tyler, Robert Tyler Jones, was born in the White House on January 24, 1843. As a young man, Jones joined the Confederate side during the Civil War. He saw action at Gettysburg and was part of the infamous Pickett's Charge during that infamous battle. According to an account published in the magazine Confederate Veteran in 1894, fellow soldier James T. Carter remembered Jones acting valiantly during the charge, picking up the flag of the regiment after the man holding it had been killed. Amazingly, Jones survived and was honored for his gallantry. He was later present at Appomattox when General Robert E. Lee surrendered in 1865. He died on May 18, 1895 at the age of 52. His obituary incorrectly stated he was the only male child ever born in the White House. When James K. Polk became president in 1845, he brought a close male relative with him to the White House to serve as his private secretary, just as many presidents had before him. In Polk's case, it was his nephew, Joseph Knox Walker, and it was in the White House on March 15, 1846, that Joseph's wife, Augusta, gave birth to their fourth child, Sarah Sally Walker. Sally wrote about herself as a young girl in an article for the newspaper St. Louis Republic. She called herself a little queen who was devoted to the president so much that she would tend to get in the way. She admitted to a habit of infiltrating cabinet meetings and also claimed that the president would try to find someone that he could hand the little girl off to. When another child was born at the White House decades later, Sally sent a letter to that child's mother, First Lady Frances Cleveland, essentially as a hello from one White House baby to another. She hoped that the tradition would continue and that the latest child would live on and eventually send greetings to another future White House baby.
You gotta see the baby. When are you gonna see the baby?
The second child of Joseph Knox Walker and Augusta Adams Tabb to be born in the White House during President James K. Polk's administration was a son named Joseph Knox Walker Jr., who went by Knox. He was born on December 9, 1847. In an article about her childhood, Joseph's sister Sally explained that while she might have been a little queen, her younger brother was a baby king. She also noted that among all of their parents' 10 children, Knox was the pet lamb of the fold. Sally also stated that some people said that Knox was the first boy born in the White House, a claim that was repeated in several other sources. And just like when that claim was made about President Tyler's grandson, these sources are complete bunk. On August 9, 1857, the Memphis Daily Appeal reported that Knox had recently died after falling off a horse. While that obituary placed his age at 12 and a half, in reality, he was only 10 years old. Sally wrote that her mother, Augusta, never recovered from the death of her beloved boy, and that the tragedy contributed to Augusta's own death less than 2 years later. Being able to say that you were born in the White House is certainly a fun fact, but only one person in that group can also say that she went on to become an actual princess. Julia Grant was born to President Ulysses S. Grant's son Frederick and his wife Ida on June 7, 1876. Her parents had been living with the president since their marriage 2 years earlier. In her memoir, My Life Here and There, published in 1921, Julia wrote of her White House birth, "In a quiet room, its windows looking out under the great portico of the president's mansion, a first child was born, an unusually large girl, 13 pounds of chubby health, myself."
That's me!
During President William McKinley's administration, Julia returned to the White House, and then the president showed her the location where she'd come into the world. Julia wasn't old enough at the time to remember much about her experience living in Washington, but she was able to recount the time that President Grant brought her to an official event, with dignitaries greeting the large baby in the receiving line and even kissing her hand. Julia lived in Europe when her father held a diplomatic post, and it was there that she met the Russian Prince Michael Kanakuzin. They married in 1899, had 3 children, and divorced in 1934. According to her obituary in the New York Times, Julia remained involved in politics and society, attending events regularly, even after losing most of her eyesight. She died on October 4, 1975, at the age of 99. Grover Cleveland is the holder of several unique presidential accolades. He was the first and thus only president so far to be married in the White House, as well as the first and only one to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. While the interterm birth of his eldest child, Ruth, might have been a more famous event, it was his second daughter, Esther, who was and is still the only child of a sitting president to be born in the White House. When her younger sister Marion arrived 2 years later, their father was still president, though her birth happened in Massachusetts. And though Jackie Kennedy also gave birth while she was the first lady decades later, she did so in a hospital. Esther would remain famous for her place of birth, as it was mentioned in many newspaper articles about her, including one in the New York Times about her social debut when she was 19. But she almost wasn't even born there in the first place. A few months before she arrived, the president had a secret operation and was recovering away from Washington with his family. They reportedly arrived back at the White House on September 1, 1893, and First Lady Frances Cleveland gave birth exactly 1 week later. In 1918, Esther married a British Army officer at Westminster Abbey in London. She lived to be 86, dying on June 25, 1980 in New Hampshire. Francis B. Sayre Jr. was born in the White House on January 17, 1915. His mother, Jessie, was the daughter of President Woodrow Wilson. As a young man, Sayre went to divinity school and became an Episcopal reverend. That led him to serving as a chaplain on a ship during World War II. In 1951, he became Dean of Washington, D.C.'s National Cathedral, a position that he held for 27 years and which gave him an important, though unofficial, voice in U.S. politics. While Woodrow Wilson is infamous for his racism, his grandson at least attempted to make up for it with his emphatic and demonstrative opposition to segregation. He participated in the 1965 Voting Rights March in Alabama that Martin Luther King Jr. organized, and he was also on the President's Committee on Equal Employment during the John F. Kennedy administration. Sayre was also an early and loud critic of Senator Joseph McCarthy. As he put it during a 1954 sermon, there is a devilish indecision about any society that will permit an impostor like McCarthy to caper out in front while the main army stands idly by.
Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last?
A decade later, Sayre spoke out against the Vietnam War. He also served for 3 years as the head of the United States Committee for Refugees. He retired in 1977 and lived another 3 decades, passing away at the age of 93 on October 3, 2008.